Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Hi everyone, so I wanted to do a quick update on fighting viruses. The main information into the webinar is the same as before, so if you missed it last time, I'm going to be covering the 3 tips for fighting viruses and also what to do, what practical things you can do to help yourself to support your system when it comes up against viruses. But I wanted to do an update on the perspective side, the stats, if you like, pertaining to where we're at with the viruses. So this graph gives you a perspective on the numbers. So the blue, this one here, graph, gives you all deaths. It says there, all deaths up until the 25th of September this year, 2020. And yes, we did have a spike in the number of total deaths around those weeks between the end of March and the beginning of May. So yeah, there definitely was a peak in the deaths. And you'll see here the red graph shows you the deaths where coronavirus is mentioned on the death certificate. And so you can see that it starts to peak along those weeks that we mentioned. But the whole point of this slide is for us to put this into perspective and to look at the number of other deaths that are occurring. So you can see the peak number of deaths that were happening was around the 10,000 mark. And we'll see in the slide that's coming that it was the total number of deaths so far has been around 52,000. So this is giving you a weekly look. So this was, the peak was 10,000, but you know, at that time, people were dying of other causes. So you've got the graph above showing that over 10,000 people, between 10 and 15,000, were dying of these other causes as well, before and after. So there's this gap between what was happening with COVID and what was happening with when you add all of the deaths together. So it's important to understand that there may seem to be an emphasis being placed on COVID, and I don't say that that's wrong, but remember that people dying from other things, and more people are dying from other things. And I updated this graph, this table from last time. So as I said, the number of number of deaths that have happened from coronavirus have been around 53,000, nearly 54,000. Now, the average figures taken from the Office of National Statistics and Public Health England show that each year this is a similar number of people dying. Ischemic heart disease is 40,000. Strokes and dementia is 42,000. So even if you just take those two together, you're going to get nearly double the amount of coronavirus death. Add to that 32,000 from respiratory disorders and flu, and just lung cancers alone is giving you up towards the 20,000 mark. So people are dying from these, and these are preventable deaths. We're not sure whether the measures that we're taking in terms of social distancing and all the other measures, whether they're impacting on these figures. There's a lot of debate about the COVID figures, but there doesn't need to be that much debate about whether we can prevent these things. And we can, and we should be mindful of those figures. If we look at the leading cause of death in the UK, it is still, for men over 50, heart disease and Alzheimer's. If we look at the leading cause of death for women over 50, it's breast, lung cancer and dementia, Alzheimer's. These are the figures that need to, the facts that need to jump out at us. And for me, this is probably the most important thing for us to think about. So if you end up in intensive care, then the people that don't do so well are the people with high blood pressure, diabetes, and that are overweight. Ethnic minorities tend to be faring worse. So Asians and blacks tend to be faring worse. And is that because they've got more high blood pressure, diabetes, and being overweight? So it's these that we need to be focusing on, not the virus itself, because if you're well, then you're going to fight the virus. It's getting rid of these underlying conditions that is the most important thing. Limit carbs, eat more fermented foods, and change your water. Why do we need to limit the carbs? We need to limit carbs because viruses love them. Limit your carbs and you limit the food that you're giving to the viruses. What happens when we limit our carbs? We produce ketones. And in the first webinar, I talked some more about the ketones called BOB and AA, beta hydroxybutyrate and acetyl acetate. These are produced by the liver when we have used up our carbs, and they have beneficial effects for the brain, heart. They reduce inflammation. They help to switch on and off our epigenetics, our DNA. The ketones will switch on our good genes. They fuel the mitochondria, and mitochondria is that energy, is the engine of our cells. What else can we do to improve the amount of BOB that we produce? Moderate exercise and eating fermented carbohydrates, so fermented vegetables. Let's look at fermented foods. When we eat fermented foods, they have an anti-inflammatory effect. They are colon foods. When our gut is healthy, we control the amount of inflammation that's going on. Fermented foods will help us to produce nutrients. And I went through this on fermented foods, particularly vitamin C. Vitamin C is an antimicrobial. Even apart from that, fermented foods produce substances which are antimicrobial. They're like antibiotics themselves. What about water? So these micropollutants, the stuff that the treatment plants don't get rid of, include pesticides, pharmaceuticals, beauty products, and plastics. They interfere with our water, and so instead of our water being something that is actually energetic and helps us to detoxify, our water is actually causing an increase in the toxic inflammatory burden that we have. So I talked about that on the first webinar as well. In that first webinar, I also talked about focused intent and how that we can change our water. We can change the electromagnetic frequency that happens around our water. I gave an example of this experiment where this was the frequency around the water before the experiment, and then after the experiment, the frequency around the water increased. And this is basically saying that we can change the way our water behaves. Well, that's the sort of the link with our body. This experiment happened outside of the body. Okay, so that's enough for a recap on the 3 tips. Viruses. So one of the main treatments are antiviral drugs, and I'm not going to spend any time really on antiviral drugs because you don't have access to them. The only thing to say is that we fight viruses best when we have a strong immune system, and if I'm going to recommend anything that you might take, sort of to simulate that, then it would be your probiotics. And the ones that I like are the spores biotics, because they don't get broken down in the upper intestine. So peak biotic is one of them, and you get that from Pure Health online.co.uk. That's if in the UK. And the other one is Megaspore Biotic, and the cheapest place I've found that is at keyscience.com. The Megaspore is 2 a day, and the peak biotic is 1 a day. Although when you get ill, you can take double that amount. So I would say that these are the probiotics are, if you like, simulating the antiviral sort of drugs, if you like. They're not, but what they're doing is they're shoring up your large intestine. So what else? The common things that we can do if we begin to get ill is vitamins and minerals, and the B vits, C and D, magnesium, zinc and selenium are our main port of call. And in this paper, is a current paper in February 2020, they looked at the potential interventions for the new coronavirus in China, and they did a systematic review, which means that they looked at lots of studies and found out what were the common interventions that would work. And basically the first thing to say that swine flu, remember bird flu, SARS, they're all corona type viruses. And so what they found is vitamins B, C and D were useful for MERS coronavirus, for ventilator-induced lung injury, for bird flu, avian coronavirus, lower respiratory tract infections, which is pneumonias, vitamin D for bovine coronavirus, and then selenium and zinc also for the coronaviruses as well as measles. So you don't have to wait till you get ill to take those. If you wanted to, you could be taking supplements for that. I'm not a great supplement fan, but some people don't get on well with eating fermented foods, and people don't get on well with cutting their carbs. And so if that's you, then a good supplement that contain these things probably would be a good idea. Let's look at the vitamin C in a bit more detail. This is interesting paper. It's interesting to look at the evolution of the research and how it's not taken up in mainstream. But this paper in 1953 talks about how the doctor talks about how he uses vitamin C. And at that point, he was using it to treat measles, giving 1 gram every 2 hours. Now, in our supplements, we would have 500 milligrams, so half that amount, or 1 gram, and we might take that every day and think that we're doing well. And there's no problem with that. He's using it during treatment for measles, and also for pneumonia, he was giving 4 grams intravenously every 2 to 4 hours for 2 weeks to treat pneumonia. So it still hasn't really, it's hit in intensive care as intravenous. Vit-C is beginning to be used. Complementary alternative medicine practitioners will use intravenous vitamin C. So let's have a look. Some of the most prominent complementary and alternative doctors put out a release about coronavirus and suggestions for how we should be supplementing ourselves or treating ourselves if we're told to sort of self-isolate at home, etc. Obviously, if you're very sick, you're going to call the emergency services and they'll take you through what to do. But if they tell you that you're going to stay at home, then these are things that you can be doing. They're talking about taking vitamin C to bowel tolerance throughout the day. So bowel tolerance is the way I would do it is I'd buy some vitamin C powder and just ingredients. Sell that. Just ingredients. So Vit C as ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid. And what I would do is just take in the evening was to take maybe half a teaspoon in some water, warm water, something like that, and then go to bed and see whether it gives you diarrhea. If half a teaspoon gives you diarrhea, so like 2.5 milligrams gives you diarrhea, then that is your bowel tolerance. If you wake up in the morning, you've not had any, tummy upset or anything, then it means that you probably can take some more. So the next day, next evening, you could take, say, a teaspoon and see whether that does. We all have different tolerances, so it's about finding how much you can tolerate. Some people tolerate 40 grams or so a day at once. And so what you're going to do is then once you've found your tolerance, you take that tolerance every few hours throughout the day if you're ill. And so this doctor talks about treating influenza with up to 150,000 milligrams. That's 150 grams of Vit C. He would do that intravenously, treating flu. And he comments that you and I, to some extent, can simulate that. So I'm not going to give ourselves intravenous Vit C, but if we take it by mouth very, very often. He talks about when he had pneumonia, he took 2 grams, 2,000 milligrams, every 6 minutes by the clock to get him to saturation. Saturation means bowel tolerance. And then his oral dose was over 100,000 milligrams. And he said his fever, cough, and other symptoms were reduced in hours. But he needed to keep taking it because the virus keeps replicating. It's not like an antibiotic; you take it once and then it works for over 4 hours. It works in a shorter time. You have to keep dosing. And complete recovery took just a few days. So what happens is you need more the worse the infection is because your body's using it up. So your saturation, you need more to get to saturation levels. What else are they recommending? Magnesium. Magnesium, you can get that in Epsom salts baths. If you've got a bath, you can just throw a handful in each day, or magnesium spray. Vitamin D. Vitamin D isn't just about sunlight. It isn't just about your bones. It's a hormone which responds to inflammation. And the more inflammation you have, the lower your vitamin D is going to be. And this happens, it goes down acutely with acute inflammation. So if you're ill, you can start by taking 4,000 international units per day for 2 weeks and then reducing it to 2,000. I have to say, this still is a small dose. You'll see, oh, well, that's the maximum dose. But I've done talks on vitamin D and I can't go into it in depth, but 4,000 international units still isn't a whopping dose. But it will bring your levels up so that you can begin to deal with some of that inflammation. The other thing to say about Vit D is that it comes up if you take a probiotic as well. So taking the probiotic, the fermented foods, plus the Vit D will give it a shove in the right direction even more. They're saying to take 20 to 40 milligrams per day of zinc. Selenium, Dr. Damien Dowling is one of the foremost experienced complementary and alternative medicine doctors in the UK, possibly worldwide, and he talks about swine flu, bird flu, SARS, all these corona type things developing in selenium deficient areas of China. Ebola and HIV, similar type of infections, again in selenium deficient areas of sub-Saharan Africa. He said this is because the same oxidative stress that causes inflammation also forces the virus to mutate rapidly. So when selenium deficient virus infected hosts were supplemented with selenium, the viral mutation rates went down and their immune system improved. So selenium is a good shout. You get that in nuts, seeds, things like that. What about vitamin B and A? So B complex given with A with each meal. B is important also when you're taking high dose Vit C, because it prevents, particularly B12 is going to prevent this oxalate forming, which is the cause of kidney stones and can be associated with kidney failure. So if you do have a history of kidney stones or family history, immediate family history, then be careful with high dose Vit C. Make sure you're taking a B complex to mitigate the oxalate formation. I think that is it for this section. Okay, let's look at fats. And this first paper that I've got up here is dealing with omega-3 fatty acids as a coadjuvant. So it's a sort of a help along with other treatments in AIDS. And the reason I put it up there is because it helps us to understand how the treatments for coronaviruses work. So the AIDS virus is similar to coronavirus in that it infects the ninja P. So those of you that have heard me speak before know that this ninja P looking thing is an immune cell. And this diagram is of our gut lining cells. These are the gut cells. And normally when they are happy, there's no gaps in between them. This is an unhappy gut, a leaky gut, and stuff has been allowed to pass through into the body. Now, if this is a virus, then our own immune cells will come and try and deal with that virus. So these, we call them ninja Ps because they look like ninja Ps, but they're actually immune cells, macrophages. It's an abbreviation, macrophages. And so this is him. So a virus would get itself, one of these guys would get itself growing in here and start to hijack the mechanism of the cell. And so looking at the way omega-3 fats work in AIDS is it was a way for us to understand what's happening in our immune cells and in coronavirus. So what happens is that the virus, as I said, grows in the macrophage. And the macrophage, the ninja P, then produces cytokines. Cytokines is the fire. And the cytokines gives us the symptoms that we experience when we have flu or a viral infection, the fever, the cough, the headache, etc. Same thing in AIDS. And omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids will reduce this cytokine production. And in coronavirus, the people that are very sick and end up in intensive care are ill because of the chest symptoms, because of the breathing, the lower respiratory tract pneumonia. And that is caused, those symptoms are caused by this cytokine storm, this inflammation overload for the lungs. So in this paper, it talks about DHA. DHA is omega-3 fatty acids. If you take fish oils, you'll see DHA and EPA on the back of the bottle. And this paper is talking about how some of its metabolites, the breakdown products of DHA and EPA, can help to modulate or to modify inflammation that happens in macrophages as a response to damaged macrophages. And so what happens is the macrophage takes up the DHA and produces metabolites, the breakdown products. Some of them are called protectins. There's a lot of research activity looking at what protectins do in the macrophage. So the macrophage takes up the DHA where the virus is starting to replicate, and it inhibits this cytokine production. It inhibits the fire. Just wanted to show you some examples of some fats in my kitchen. Here goes. Okay, so this is also in my kitchen. That's raw red palm oil. And most people don't know what to do with it, but I've got here some soup. And you can see some meat in there. And there's beans in there. Yeah, so you can do some really nice kind of Mexican-y inspired soup, stew, whatever you want to call it, with the palm oil. And I'm going to go through some recipes with oils, with good oils, another time. Okay. And here are some more fats in my kitchen. That's raw red palm oil. And most people don't know what to do with it, but I've got here some soup. And you can see some meat in there. And there's beans in there. Yeah, so you can do some really nice kind of Mexican-y inspired soup, stew, whatever you want to call it, with the palm oil. And I'm going to go through some recipes with oils, with good oils, another time. So, what have I got in the fridge? So this is a mess, my fridge, right? So all sorts of bits and pieces, but I'll just show you that this here is the oil, Olivita oil, which has D3 in it. It's fish oil and olive oil all together. And that is something that we do take as a supplement. Yeah. What else have I got in here? This is my little kind of my sourdough starter, if you like. It's made up of sake leaves, which is a bit like the shoikuji, but it's really good for making bread and stuff. Look there, a bit of coconut milk, ROID coconut milk. I've got some kombucha fermenting berries. The boys have got some yam there. If you see in the back there, that's my sake leaves. In the packaging. I shouldn't really leave it in the packaging, but there you go. Here I put that in overnight. It's fermenting beans, and I can show you how to ferment those on another webinar. And that's there because I want to slow the fermentation down. I don't want it to be so tart when we eat it. We've got some of Gloria Ruth's. I think that's one of her experiments there. What else I've got to show you? Yeah, I've got this, which is my brewed cocoa beans. Now, what I do with that is I mix it with the coffee, and my powders. That's how I drink my coffee. I don't kind of, let me whiz over and show you that. I'll show you that in another cupboard. So I don't know if you can see that. That is my coffee. Just going to show you. That's what it looks like. That's got coffee and cocoa beans powder and my powders. And I put that in the percolator. Great. Fantastic. Mycotoxin-free coffee. You know, the bulletproof type. And then what else have I got in here? So I have got a bit of chocolate. You can see it's a splodge of chocolate. So what I've done is taken some dark chocolate and mixed it with my powder so it starts fermenting, and then stick it in there overnight so that I can just break off a bit after for pudding and stuff. And then I've got a whole load of kombucha. This was given to me by my friend Mirabelle. I haven't drunk it yet. Yeah, these are all kinds of, so this one here, which is a bit brown, is a kombucha. So that kombucha is made with quinine. No, not quinine, Cinchona bark. Okay, that's kind of it. A bit of tahini there. tahini, sesame seeds, zinc, and all that, vitamin A. Yeah, that's the mess that is my fridge. Got lots of eggs. You see, lots of eggs. Lots of eggs. A bit of salami as well. Good. So let's look now specifically at hydroxychloroquine. So this has been in the press quite a bit if you've been following the coronavirus much, and a number of weeks ago it came to the forefront because President Trump said that it was the main drug that we should be using, hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, which is an antibiotic, and he got slammed in the media, and several states in America actually banned the use of it, and they were basically saying, how does he know, he's not a doctor, la la la. And there was actually a doctor in the States called Zelenko, I think his name is, who has had several hundreds of cases of coronavirus, and not one of them, well, I think one out of several hundred died, but the rest, he treated them with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. And he points out that you have to get the drugs in to the people before they end up on ITU, because once they need sort of the ventilatory support and their lungs are too bad, they don't do so well. But as I understand it, please don't quote me verbatim from him, but that you have to give the hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin immediately the person starts presenting with the symptoms. But anyway, just recently now, a survey shown that many doctors around the world view it as one of the best treatments. And I know in London there are studies being done, trials being done to test this out now. But let's look at it in a little bit more detail. It is actually fascinating. It's something that I've looked at before, partly because it's a drug that sports doctors and orthopedic doctors, rheumatologists would use in resistant cases of joint problems. But it is a fascinating history. Quinine itself was first, I think the Incas were using it way before we tried to make it into a drug, and it came to prominence when one of the Incan descendants used it to help the Countess of Chincon, who was suffering from malaria. It was then brought from South America to India, where the British colonial people used it to fight malaria, and it was put it into the tonic. That was the tonic that formed the G&T. Basically, the tonic is very bitter. The quinine itself is a very bitter bark, and they would grind it down and then add the alcohol to make it go down better. And so that's where the G&T came from, to ward off malaria. And it was used in World War II as a anti-malarial prophylaxis as well. It's been used over the years. It's been fought over, and trade wars have been had because of quinine, because it is an antipyrexial. It takes the fever down. And it's also incredible in that it treats immune disorders, so rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, has this anti-inflammatory, reduces the cytokines response in infections. What else? It's pretty amazing, because studies are still being done on hydroxychloroquine, in that it's useful for heart disease, blood cancers, solid tumours like breast, brain, colon. It improves glucose tolerance and lipid profile. And it's safe over 500 milligrams per day. This, if you're not a medic, then it doesn't necessarily mean very much, but just if you are and you wanted to know, then there you go. So let's look at quinine itself. Go back to that. Quinine, what they found in the initial stages was that quinine, when it's combined with another herb, some people might know it, wormwood, it's an antiparasite, artemisate. When it's combined, it gives a better coverage for malaria, because what happened was it's in many areas it's still used as an anti-malarial drug, but there are lots of the malarial parasites that are resistant to it. But if you combine it with artemisate, I think that's how you say it, then you get a better coverage in malaria. Artemisate also is something that's used for cancers as well. I understand breast cancer, and when it's also had history, and I wonder whether this is where Dr. Zelenko was already familiar with it. It has history with being used with clindamycin to treat another infection called babesia, one of these slow infections that you get with Lyme and Mycoplasma and Epstein-Barr. If you look for these chronic infections in people, people have them. And this is why I believe that coronavirus it's not just coronavirus we're treating a system that is overloaded with toxins and maybe slow infections. So quinine from cinchona bark, it's sometimes cinchona bark, I'm not quite sure how it's supposed to be pronounced, but you can get it in the yellow or the red bark form. Both are approved for use in drinks. It's found in tonic water, bitter lemon, vermouth, I think that is. And what it does is it relaxes muscle, it increases pH and reduces the oxygen uptake in the parasite and disables the parasite. Let's have a look. High doses, if you're taking, I think I worked out that you'd need to be taking at least a litre a day of tonic water to get high doses. Something called synchonism, which has tinnitus, blurred vision, headaches, and nausea. And this is said to be a side effect. It reduces your blood sugar, but actually it's also a positive effect if you suffer with high blood sugar or insulin resistance. Although, if you are diabetic and you're on medication, then you should monitor yourself if you decide to drink lots of tonic water. Doses over 200 milligrams a day, which when I was in general practice, people were prescribing quinine for leg cramps, and people will be on 100, 200 milligrams per day for years, for decades, for their leg cramps. But then recently I noticed a publication from Public Health England saying that it shouldn't be prescribed because studies have shown there's increased deaths from sudden cardiac arrest, and whether that's because it's altering the heart rhythm, it's likely to be that. But if you look at the big picture, you have to ask yourself, why do people have leg cramps in the first place? They've probably got some kind of mineral issue, magnesium, all the things that would then also alter the way the heart rhythm works. So just to say that 200 milligrams a day, every day, is what some people were taking anyway for leg cramps. And there are specific contraindications to quinine. People with G6PD deficiency, and if you had it, you'd know. If you know for sure that you've got quinine sensitivity, a lot of people in Africa, because of malaria, they'll know already that they've got quinine sensitivity. Tinnitus, optic neuritis, again, you've had that, and you'd know if you also had reduced platelets. But what if you want to sort of look at making some of this stuff yourself? Because actually, if you look on the internet, you'll see homemade tonic syrup all over the place. And there's this big buzz with people making their own tonic water. So if you wanted to just, buy tonic water, so that you know how much is in this stuff, there's about 2.48 milligrams of quinine in one of those tiny bottles of tonic water. And the regulations say that you're allowed 83 milligrams in a litre of tonic water if you're making it as a drink. Cinchona bark will contain between 5 to 7% quinine. So you have your bark, and in that bark there'll be 5 to 7% of quinine in that. So it's not all quinine. If you had a 200 gram bag, that will give you 10 to 14 grams of quinine, and it's so bitter that you wouldn't just take the whole lot just like that. You would dilute it, and 1 ml would give you about 10 milligrams of quinine. And remembering that the leg cramp thing is coming on. The leg cramp treatment is 200 to 300 milligrams of quinine per day. So just to put that 1 ml into perspective, you're nowhere near this sort of sudden cardiac death level. Or what you could just do is buy just full fat tonic water and mix it with your kombucha so that the bugs in the kombucha start to eat the sugar, and then you know exactly how much you're putting in there, and you can titrate it so that you're perhaps in the tens of milligrams. So I just wanted to show you some quinine in my kitchen. This is the red Cinchona bark, and you can either just blend it into a dry powder and then add it into stuff, and it will be very bitter, or you can put some in a pan and boil it up and then use that. So I've got the 200-gram sachet of red Cinchona bark, and I've worked out that if I fill this dessert spoon with the bark, then that's about 12 grams of bark. There you go. And then I'm going to add some water to that. So when you've boiled it up, you've got the boiled bark with the water. Strain off the water, so you've got your Cinchona water, and then I've just added some to some old kombucha. You can see it bubbling away with the fronds of yeast in there. And you've basically got kombucha tonic. So what can we say in summary for fighting viruses? Arguably the most important thing you can do is follow the 3 tips. Make sure that your terrain, your immune system is strong enough to withhold whatever is thrown at you. Second thing is the T without the G. That's your tonic, your quinine. That's a nice background prophylaxis, I would say. I can't say for sure whether it's going to stop you from getting coronavirus or viruses, but the evidence does suggest that it is a type of an antiviral. Instead of prescribing yourself medications, well, you can't prescribe yourself medications, but instead of antibiotics, the azithromycin, I'm suggesting Megaspore Biotic or Peak Biotic. Peak Biotic is cheaper. It has 1 less microbe than the Megaspore Biotic, but they're good things to have in your cupboard, and if you should get unwell, then you can start taking those. Your vitamins, minerals, and omega-3. And the omega-3 oil that I take as a supplement there that came up on the video was Olivita. That's from Norway. You have to contact them to buy it from them directly. Key Science, I like their mineral supplements. You can get them also from Nutrisorb, I believe. I mentioned Vit C from Just Ingredients. I think that's about it. Thank you. Think well. Stay well. If you should need to contact me, then do email me at essie@dressie.com. Do sign up for the newsletter at dressie.com. Also, that way you won't miss out on any up and coming webinars. Stay well. That's it for now, everyone. Remember, change starts with you. Be well.